Okay, so using the scene that we've already set up, this time we're going to make a little geodesic dome and apply some materials to it. So let's have a little look. So refresh ourselves. What have we got in our scene? We've got a bot. There's our little bot character. Oh, I've accidentally deleted my little bot. One sec. There he is. Hit Z. Zoom in. That's our little bot sitting out there on the world, in the world on his own. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new object, and this object is going to be called a geosphere. Just drag it into the scene, and we have to get a relationship, a scale relationship to the bot. And what I'm suggesting is about 2000 centimeters. Should be pretty big, but not excessively. Let's put the two together. Yeah, that kind of looks interesting scale-wise. Okay, so I've made a geodesic dome, or a geosphere, but the thing is, I've got hemisphere ticked, which means obviously it's been cut in half to form a hemisphere. We've set the segments, or I've got the segments set to 2. You can change that, but I'd recommend first time round just leave them at 2. I'm going to right click on that object and I'm going to isolate it so we can go underneath and look at what's going on. So underneath we can see there's a vertex there giving us all this surface that we need to get rid of. So let's add an edit poly modifier, go to the sub-object vertex level, select that central vertex, turn that on by the way, ignore back facing, just turn it on, select that, accidents, it'll stop you accidentally selecting vertex on the other side, so delete that central one, that gives us a hollow geosphere, perfect for what we need. Come out of there, deselect the vertex of object selection, add another edit poly over the top. It's got another edit poly modifier, and this one's going to do a particular function. We're going to go to the sub-object polygon level, and we're going to Control A to select all the polygon faces. There we go, everything's selected. And we're going to create a selection set up here in this window, and we're going to call that Windows. Okay. And while we're there, we're also going to give it a particular ID number. So look for polygon material IDs, and we're going to set it to 1. And make sure you hit return when you do that so it actually goes through. So set ID 1. Perfect. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the sub-object edge level, and we're going to Control A again to select all the edges. This time round, we're going to add a chamfer to these edges. So let's look for our chamfers up there somewhere. And I'm going to click the little chamfer settings box. And I'm going to make sure the chamfers are set to try. And I think I'm going to put in about 20 centimeters. Too much. Let's go for 15. 15 centimeters. 12 centimeters? Yeah, I like 12. Okay, 12 will do. Hit the little tick to say okie dokie. So that was set to tries, and 12 say yes. Now we're going to go to our sub-object selection polygon mode again. And this time we're going to re-engage our window selection. That'll just select all the windows. But, in this little clever function, we're going to Control and I to invert that selection. Now that means that all the other sections are now selected. We're going to give them a name. We're going to call that frame outer. Okay, there we go. Now we want to extrude that frame outer selection, so I'm going to extrude it, make sure it's by polygon, and I'm going to give it a particular amount. I'll say 20. Is that too much? Let's have a little look. 20 looks about right, actually. That looks good. That looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my Windows selection, and this time let's do that one more time. Windows selection. I'm going to say Control and I to invert that selection one more time. Now, all of that inner frame is selected, the inner edges and the outer edges. So I'm going to call that all frame. That's my selection up there. And I'm also going to give that a specific ID number. And that ID number is going to be ID number 2. So hit 2 there. So the frame has an ID number, a material ID number of 2, and the glass or the window has an ID number of 1. That's going to be important in a moment. Okie doke. Now, let's see if we can add a material to this object. So what we're going to do in our Windows, we're going to just call up our material editor. So I'll just hit M on the keyboard and up comes our material editor. And what we're going to do is we're going to add something called a general multi-sub-object material. And we only have 2 ID numbers, so we can just choose set 2 in there. That's all we're going to be working with, ID 1 and ID 2. So the first material is going to be our standard, and you know what, I'll do that again so you can see me doing it. The first material we're going to create is an Arnold surface material, and it's just going to be a standard surface material. And we'll give it a name, because it's good to name your materials just like it is with your objects. So we'll call it M for material and frames. Okay, and we're going to put that into ID number 2. We're also going to create another material. This one's going to be called this is going to be a physical material. And we'll put that into ID number 1. Let's give it a name. We'll call it Windows. And to begin with, let's give it a preset, a quite distinguished preset material. And I think I'm going to just give it a polished copper to begin with. So we've got a standard grey for the frame, a polished copper for the windows. And what we're going to do is make sure that this object is currently selected. Come out. If you're accidentally inside sub-object mode, just deselect it there. And back into our materials, now that this dome is selected in the viewport, we just click on multi-sub-object material and we choose the arrow that says assign material to selection, and it gets applied to our selection. Now, let's just have a little look. Where's our little dude, our little AI bot? Let's turn him on so we get a sense of scale. That's about right. Move it round so we get a little sense of scale there, and hit F9. Oh, actually, just cancel that. Right click and end isolate, so you get the ground plane in there, bouncing a little bit of light up as well. Let's do that again. And oh, I've over zoomed. Let's just zoom in a little tiny bit. My mouse is acting up a little bit. There we go. That's a better position. Let's do a quick F9. Let's have a little look at the scene. So we've got a kind of copper reflected window and we've got a frame. Of course, because we've got our materials, so let's just review this. Because we've got our materials, I'll just pop that there. One more F9. And I'll just pull the material window into view. Because we've got those materials set up, so we've got our multi-sub-object material, and it's got 2 IDs attached to it, so ID materials attached to it, and each ID has a separate material. So one's got the standard Arnold surface, which is a really fabulous material to work with. You can do a million things with it. And then we've got a physical material, which is out of the box, gives you things like plastic, concrete, glass, copper, etc. And that's been applied to the object. Now, just final little recap in the scene. Push that to the side. Push that to the side. Your object has got 2 edit polys on it. And at its base, it's got a little geosphere. So the first edit poly hollows it out. The second one is the one that we use to kind of give it the extrusions and polygon selection. So it's a pretty straightforward little process, but there are lots of little things that you can do wrong as you're going along. So just take your time. Oh, I don't need that in the scene. So I'll just close that. My extras, turn the extras off. There we go. There's a lot of little things that you can do kind of like in the scene, but it gives you a nice, fast way to make something like a geodesic dome, which of course, if you want to research this, goes all the way back to Buckminster Fuller in the mid-60s, who developed this as a kind of architectural model. So look him up, and I'll just throw that back in the scene while it's rendering. And I think that's good enough. That's a 10-minute tutorial. Good enough. You are relying, of course, on the physical setup, the sun and physical sky setup that we established in the previous video. All of these links will be available via Teams as well.